Alright, y'all. So today I wanted to make a very quick review of The Hobbit, but not the one that many of you are probably thinking, the Peter Jackson one. But no, we're going to be reviewing the 1977 Hobbit, the animated TV special that was created, and I guess is technically might be, I'm not exactly sure, but it was one of the first ever adaptations of Tolkien's work. So to go into this animated TV special, it's an adaptation, of course, of one of the most famous fantasy books of all time, The Hobbit by J.R. Tolkien. I don't really think that book needs any introduction. It is one of the most famous fantasy books of all time. It brought in a whole new genre of modern fantasy that we're still living in to this day. Now, I've heard of The Hobbit loosely over the years. I, of course, have heard of Lord of the Rings. And, I've actually heard a little bit about this animated special over the years. Now, I've seen all the Peter Jackson movies. It's been a long time, but I do really enjoy most of them. I did also see the Peter Jackson Hobbit movies, which I can't really tell you an opinion about them because I totally forgot everything about them. I really don't even know if I had any opinion on them at the time that I watched them. But I was kind of curious about this other version of The Hobbit from 1977. I really was a little bit nostalgic for it, not because of the special itself, which I hadn't seen up until I'm doing this review, but there was a animated TV show called Mad that was airing on Cartoon Network at the time. Not sure if some people who are watching this remember this, but they would make parodies of movies and other things, and they did a parody of The Hobbit. It was called Hip Hop Hobbit. I know it sounds ridiculous, and the whole joke is at the time, a more modern Hobbit and Ian McKellen's Gandalf were watching a tape of the previous version of The Hobbit, which was portrayed as this goofy 80s, cheese rap fest kind of thing called Hip Hop Hobbit. And it actually used tons of these designs from this original 1977 animated special. So it's kind of weird in a lot of ways. That little special paid homage to this, and that's kind of where I got my curiosity from and tried to check this out. Now, a lot of people who grew up maybe around the 70s, 80s, or 90s before the Jackson movies probably saw this. I've seen a lot of comments spewing nostalgia, but I didn't really grow up on this, so this is going to be a little bit more of an unbiased review of it. But overall, I gotta say, for what it is, it's not bad. It's not bad. I don't think it's as bad as some other YouTubers have said it is. It's painfully dated and, it's a really bad adaptation. I don't know. I didn't really get that vibe. I think it was just all right. Not great. Like I said, I can't tell you if it's any better from the Jackson movies because it's been a long time. But I do think, for one of the few things I do remember from the Jackson movies, they felt very stretched out because, it was one book and they adapted it over 3 movies. This feels very tight and concise, which is, I think, a pro and a con in this case because I do think pacing-wise, a lot of things could have been improved here. So before I get into my pros and cons, my overall thoughts, if you've never heard of The Hobbit, the very basic, rudimentary outline of it, it's basically about this it's about this guy called Bilbo Baggins. He's a hobbit, and he basically teams up with a wizard, kind of begrudgingly accepts a sort of a quest to go to this mountain and basically get treasure from this, reclaim an area of the mountain to these people called the dwarves. The wizard's name is Gandalf, and Bilbo Baggins, the hobbit, goes on a quest with these dwarves and the wizards across many parts of Middle-earth to eventually get to this mountain. They steal a bit of treasure, but the dragon, who's kind of safekeeping all of this stuff and captured it all, Smog the dragon, gets mad at them, almost kills the whole group. Eventually, they find a way to kill him, and then there's a whole debacle. The dwarves get selfish. They want to keep all the gold and all the issues after the dragon got defeated. There's sort of a battle of 4 to 5 armies that takes place. And then the kind of story ends with the Hobbit going back to his home. I know it's a very brief description of it. Very much. I know I'm missing out like a lot of details, but I'm kind of assuming y'all have probably heard of the Hobbit. Excuse me. Now I want to get some pros. For one, I do mostly like the animation art style here. Now, some of it looks very strange. I'll get into my cons. This could be a thing, too, where it's like I'm kind of blinded by how well the Peter Jackson ones did it. But I do like Bilbo Baggins' design. It's kind of this weird, cute garden elf kind of vibe, garden gnome kind of vibes to it all. But I like his design. It's cute and cuddly. Interesting enough, the people who would eventually form the Studio Ghibli, which, you know, you've of course heard of many of those iconic films they made, actually did the animation. A lot of the people who formed that studio did the animation. And I think it's a huge pro here. I like the animation. I like the art style for the most part. And I like the animation. Now, it's not great animation. It's not fluid, dynamic. But then again, it was made in 1977. You know, I'm not expecting fluidity so much. But I do think the animation parts could be stilted. But I don't think it's a horrible thing. I like how Gandalf looks. I also love a lot of the voice actors in this. I really like the voice acting in general. It was out of the park. Even the guy who voices Gollum, I know that Andy Serkis is like known to be Gollum. I mean, he's a definitive version of the character. But the guy who voiced him in this animated special, and even his design, it's radically different from the Jackson one. He's more bigger. He almost more looks like a frog of sorts. But I really enjoyed this version of Gollum, and his voice actor does an incredible job. Even this version of Gandalf's pretty good. The actor who does Bilbo Baggins does a good job. I especially love the guy who voiced Smaug the Dragon. He does a really good job in that role. Benedict Cumberbatch also did a really good job for what I remember in the movies. But, like I said, I think that the guy who did him here does a really good job. And, like I said, I think The Hobbit's a pretty great story. I think it's decently told here, but there are some things I feel like in terms of subtleties, explanations, especially pacings, that this thing gets a little bit wrong. But I enjoyed it for the most part. I like the series of events. Of course, I like The Hobbit as a book. It's pretty solid. And I do like the overall themes that are present in The Hobbit, like the themes of greed and war. And, in a lot of ways, The Hobbit is an anti-war book. There's almost, like I said, a big battle that really could have been avoided if the dwarves weren't so arrogant and just wanting to keep all the gold to themselves. It's a very clear theme about capitalism, about greed, about war. All these things are present in The Hobbit, which is pretty interesting since it's a children's book. Even the fact that The Hobbit himself is not this sword-swinging action hero that, of course, is portrayed in a lot of books before The Hobbit and even other animated films and stuff. The Hobbit here is presented as more of a pacifist, a guy that treats everyone with compassion, careness, nice, and tries to avoid and pacify the sides of the war at the end. And that's really cool stuff. It's really interesting. It was groundbreaking at the time. So yeah, like I said, I like the story. I like a lot of sequences. I do like most of the designs of the characters. I like Gollum. I'm not a big fan of the elves in this, and I'll get into my cons there. But I do also like the goblins, of how exaggerated and big they look. I kind of almost in a lot of ways prefer that than some of the more generic-looking ones in the Jackson movies, at least in the Hobbit trilogy. And yeah, there's a lot of really good stuff. Also, there's a lot of songs. Now, I can't exactly tell you off the top of my head if the book had tons of musical numbers. I know that The Hobbit did have musical numbers in the pages in the original book. But here the songs also are not too bad. I didn't hate them. It's kind of a musical, and I think it's weirdly paced with the songs, but I think for the most part they work. Now I'm going to get into some of my cons. I already mentioned this earlier, but some of the designs of the characters. Now, this could be a thing that, the Jackson movies has something to do with, because those movies have become the definitive version of Tolkien's world. I'm not a big fan of the elves' designs here. The elves are portrayed as these greenish, almost goblin-like. They look more like Gollum than anything else in the movies and such, and they look really strange. I'm not sure why that design choice was done, because it just makes it very weird, especially since in most adaptations, elves are depicted as more or less similar to humans. So I did not like that design choice. It makes it very strange and more confusing. I also think, too, the pacing-wise, this book is the animated special is pretty badly paced. Some scenes happen, battles happen, and they're so brief and quick. And definitely scenes could have been expanded upon. Scenes could have been dragged out a little bit. And in general, I just think the pacing is pretty bad in this animated special. This could be a case that, like I said, they're trying to squeeze as much material down into like a basically 77-minute special. And like I said, it's pretty incredible how much they were able to condense the whole story down. But I think that, like I said, the sacrifice to that was the pacing and the smoothness of the story, which I think is a pretty big problem with this animated special. And also, I think why I do like the animation style, and the animation is pretty decent overall. There is kind of a stiltedness to it all, where characters will talk, they'll move their arm or something, and then they'll just stand still, and then repeat. It's not a huge gripe. Like, I get it. Like, it was 1977. You know, you have to look at it from that time period. It wasn't exactly the most modern day. Obviously, it's not a modern day animated film, but, you know, I had to pull it out. But it's not a huge, it's more of a gripe than it is a real critique. But I also think, too, the story is very much paced weirdly. I think more elements of the Hobbit book should have been elaborated on, and I'm sure there's plenty of other things in the book that are expanded upon that are not in this original animated film. And just in general, the whole jankiness of it all. I also go back to some of my designs. I don't like the goblins. Some of the dwarves look outright creepy. Now, in the book, from what I understand, I've never really read the book, but the dwarves are actually presented as more elderly people. And the Jackson movie doesn't really have that. They're more younger looking. And they get this part of the animated special right, but some of the designs they choose for them look horrendous. Like, some of the dwarves have these, like, enormous foreheads that are also, like, really old and wrinkly. And to me, they just don't look good. They just don't look good. The trolls or the orcs or whatever look fine. I like them. I don't like the goblins. They look pretty bad. I like Gandalf for the most part, even though there are some really weird scenes with them here and there. But that's just, like I said, presentation issues. But like I said, just some weird design choices that kind of really make this thing not as great as it could have been. And, you know, I think in general, better development, better pacing could have been done in this animated special. I'm not exactly sure that's a critique of the book or this special, just because I haven't read the book, so I can't exactly tell you. But that could have been also another big thing that could have been fixed. But yeah, to kind of quickly wrap up my review off the top of my head, overall, The Hobbit from 1977 is not bad. I didn't come out hating it. Like, I didn't come out thinking, oh, this is the worst thing. Thank God they didn't do this for the Peter Jackson movies. I'm kind of more of the opinion of, it's okay. You know, it's a bit dated. There's not really a lot of great stuff in it, but it's not horrible. There's some solid stuff. The voice acting, some parts of the story are adapted well and executed well. But also there's some bizarre choices, bizarre character designs and art choices made here. It could have been a lot better than it was, right? And I think it's, like I said, important to distinguish that and not view it through rose-colored lenses, so to speak. It's just, like I said, it's a decent special. It's not horrible. It's not, like I said, terrible. It's just kind of meh. It's very mid. If you're interested in The Hobbit, I mean, I wouldn't say this is like a horrible way to view it, but I would probably say maybe watch the movies instead, the Peter Jackson ones, or the best way is just to kind of read the graphic novel or even read the book itself. But, you know, like I said, still not a bad thing. It's also very kid-friendly, so if you want to show this to your kids, I mean, The Hobbit is a children's story. Something I think the Jackson movie kind of forgot, that, like, it's supposed to be a children's book. It's not a violent epic, But, I think, like I said, if you show it to your kids, hey, it's kid friendly, and they'll probably, they like fantasy stuff, they'll probably like it. But yeah, that's my thoughts on The Hobbit from 1977, a kind of decent animated film / special. All right, peace, y'all.